All right, well, welcome everyone to today's webinar on an introduction to communicative language teaching. My name is Claire, and thank you so much for taking time out of your evening to join us. I know you are all very busy, and so I really appreciate this time. So before we actually get started, I do want to share an introduction from Grace, who is at the embassy in Tokyo, the US Embassy in Tokyo, as she gives us some greeting.
本日はご参加いただき、誠にありがとうございます。Hello, everyone. My name is Grace Choi, and I'm an American diplomat working on education and exchanges at the United States Embassy in Tokyo. It is my pleasure to welcome you to this webinar for English teachers, organized by Tokyo English Language Fellow Claire Lee in coordination with the U.S. Embassy. As you know, English is a language that allows us to communicate with people all around the world. Through these webinars, we hope you will learn about the benefits of communicative English teaching and how to implement it in your school and classroom. Because of your efforts, Japanese students will be able to interact with youth in other countries and become performers on a global stage. As a fellow educator, I know how important it is for teachers to update and improve their teaching methods, and I hope this webinar will provide you with that opportunity. Claire Sensei is an expert on this subject, and I'm sure you will benefit from her advice and guidance. Thank you for your dedication to teaching and to your students, and please enjoy the session. Thank you, and see you soon.
And that was Grace Choi from the US Embassy giving us some introductory words. Thank you again for joining. Before we actually get started, I would love to see who is here. So if you can write in the chat box where you live, the age group that you teach, and why you have joined this workshop today. So take a moment, find the chat box, and please share about yourself so that we can get a chance to know one another during this webinar. For example, I will share, I am currently living in Tokyo, although I am from Los Angeles. Currently, I am training teachers, so adults, and I am running this workshop, but if I joined, I would be interested in learning more about how to do different communicative language activities. Welcome Natsuka-san from Fukuoka. Hello, Saitama-san. Welcome. Thank you for sharing. So we have some junior high teachers. Ibaraki in Ibaraki, as well as Hokkaido. We have some teachers also in Tokyo. Welcome. Some of you are high school teachers. Oh, elementary school, 3rd to 6th grade. Welcome, Numata-san. Welcome from Hyogo, Yokohama. Hello. In Okayama, welcome, Yoko-san. Very nice. Welcome, Okinawa. Very nice. Another teacher from Tokyo, welcome. Eri-san in Okinawa, welcome. Thank you so much for sharing, everyone. It's great to see who is here, where you are in Japan, and what age group you are teaching. So we have lots of teachers from different age groups, elementary school, middle school, and high school as well. So we are going to go ahead Briefly before we begin, some norms, please have your mic muted. However, I do want you to participate in this webinar, so please add any comments or questions in the chat box. So I would like for this to be interactive, even though it is a webinar, and for you to have a chance to share your thoughts and questions. And anytime we do have a chance to chat, please make sure to share the air, meaning be mindful of the time that you are speaking and allow for everyone to share. A reminder that this webinar is being recorded and will be shared on the U.S. Embassy Tokyo YouTube channel. So a little bit about me. My name is Claire Lee, and I am an English language fellow based in the U.S. Embassy in Tokyo. I have 10 years of teaching, training, and curriculum development experience, and I have taught all over the world, including in the United States. I used to be a middle school English teacher in the US, but I've also taught in South Africa, Vietnam, and the Philippines. So for today's agenda, we are going to talk about what actually is communicative language teaching, why should we use it, what are its principles, and we'll look at 3 activities that focus on communicative language teaching that hopefully you can apply immediately in your classes. Our objectives for today's sessions are to develop a basic understanding of communicative language teaching and its value, as well as identify ways to apply at least one of the 3 activities I will share today in your own classes. So take a moment in the chat box to share, why did you decide to learn English? So now most of you are English teachers or maybe elementary school teachers who will also be teaching English. But why did you learn English? For some of you, it may be that it was a required class in school. But for others of you, you may have been very interested in English for some reason. So I'll give you a minute to share why you've decided to learn English. So we have some responses coming in. One is to communicate with people all over the world. That's a really good point. English is known as the international language because it is spoken by many different people. And so it's a great way to communicate with others. Wanted to travel all over the world and communicate with people living abroad. A great reason to learn English, as it is often a language that is spoken in many other countries. Interested in foreign cultures, excellent. To improve speaking skills, communicating with foreigners. Yeah, I can learn lots of things from them. Yes, so speaking with people who are not Japanese will perhaps give a different perspective and a different way of thinking. To make friendships with many people in the world, and for the sake of peace. What an excellent reason. When traveling to foreign countries as a university student, I couldn't have yourself understood. Yes, great. That's a great reason. So sometimes it can feel frustrating if you are not able to communicate what you are thinking and feeling. And so learning English is a great way to communicate with other English speakers. So yes, inspired by your English teachers and visiting the States, traveling, very nice. You can exchange lots of things like culture. Very nice. Thank you all for sharing all of your wonderful reasons for why you decided to learn English. So let's talk about what is CLT, Communicative Language Teaching. Communicative language teaching is an approach developed in the 70s as an alternative approach to older language teaching methods. So in particular, the grammar translation method, which is often used, was used in the past and sometimes is still used in Japanese classes. Teachers wanted to see if there was a different way of learning languages. And like many of you mentioned previously for the question, why did you learn English? Many of you said because you wanted to communicate. It wasn't just so you can be good at language, but so that you can interact with foreigners, that you could travel to have yourself be understood by others. So the goal of communicative language teaching is to develop something called communicative competence. So what exactly is communicative competence? Communicative competence has 4 parts. First is grammatical competence, meaning you are able to understand and use grammar structures appropriately. Specifically, when we're thinking about English, things like putting the subject, verb, and then object, which is very different from constructing a sentence in Japanese. Sociolinguistic competence. This is knowledge about different social and cultural differences, especially for those between, for example, Japanese speakers and English speakers. There are some differences culturally as well. The third is strategic competence. So this is knowing not just the actual vocabulary and language, but the verbal and nonverbal strategies. So sometimes you might see someone's expression on their face or how they say something and understand maybe they don't exactly mean what they say. And finally, the fourth is discourse competence. This is making sure that what you say is understandable because it connects to one another. So coherence and cohesion. So these 4 aspects are very important when being able to communicate. It's not just about knowing vocabulary words or being able to recite something from memory. It's these 4 aspects are very important. So as I mentioned, communicative language teaching focuses on how do we help our students develop this thing known as communicative competence, these 4 different areas. Now, communicative language teaching is known as an approach, right? But let's first talk about what is the difference between an approach and a method. Any ideas about what the difference might be? Please share your answers if you have any ideas in the chat box. What is an approach versus a method? How are these 2 things different? Let's see if anyone has any ideas, and you can share them in the chat box. I'll just give us a minute to share and think about this question before we discuss what's the difference between an approach and a method. So I see some answers coming in the chat box. We have an approach is something where you take action. A method is something in one's head. Ooh, that's a very interesting interpretation of that. Yeah, I like that. Those definitions. Yes. Any others? The method is a way of doing something, but approach is to do the method. All right, so the idea is maybe the approach is the bigger the bigger thing around the method, right? The method is the way, the approach is actually doing it, right? Okay, so we have approach is more of eliciting and evoking. Approach sounds more like trying to adjust to the environment which the students are in. Okay, yeah. Really great answers, everyone. Yeah. So this distinction is going to be really important to think about. So another one, approach is based on some theories. Method is about the idea of how to teach English. Yeah, very nice. All right. So the difference is that an approach is a way of teaching where there are some principles or ideas that can be applied in many different ways. So this might be for a broader umbrella of things where you have a viewpoint of something, whereas a method is a little more strategic. It is a way of teaching where there's specific tools, systems, and procedures that the teacher follows, right? So Natsuka-san mentioned method includes games, songs, chants. That's right. So it is something specific that the teacher is doing and you're following some sort of formula. An approach is more about your ideas about how something should be taught or how students learn. So communicative language teaching is an approach, meaning there are many, many ways to apply communicative language teaching. So some of these you may have heard about, like task-based instruction, content-based instruction, text-based learning, competency-based learning, and project-based learning. So these all fall under an umbrella known as CLT. So why should we actually care about CLT, communicative language teaching? The first reason is that research shows that students can develop a better understanding of language use, and it can also develop the relationship between you as a teacher and the students, as well as students with each other. Why is this the case? Well, communicative language teaching focuses on actually communicating. And when we communicate, we develop relationships. Another reason is that research shows that students are more motivated to learn. And it prepares students beyond the classroom. So thinking back to the question around why did you learn English? As many of you had said, it was for actual real world purposes, to travel, to meet foreigners, to make friendships. So those are all things beyond the classroom where English can be used. And it develops all four skills: reading, writing, speaking, and listening. Many people have the idea that communicative language teaching is only about speaking and listening. However, we can communicate in many different ways. So we communicate through emails, through letters, maybe not so much written letters, but emails, text messages. And so those are ways that are written forms of language communication. And finally, it is a part of Japan's national curriculum standards for foreign language. So MEXT is now moving towards a communicative approach for teaching English. So what actually are the principles of CLT? I mentioned that an approach has different principles or ideas that are the underlying basis. So first, learners should speak English for real communication. This means that learners are not just reciting words in the textbook, but they're actually using it to share and receive information. For example, when you are speaking to a foreigner, you may use English to ask them questions like, "Where are you from?" And you receive an answer. For example, I might say, "I'm from the United States." And so that is an example of real communication. In addition, a second principle is to encourage students to experiment with the language and make mistakes. Mistakes are a part of language learning and actually shows growth when we are taking a chance to practice. Students should also interact with each other and be encouraged to speak. And I know that this can be a little bit challenging in Japan because students may feel very shy or self-conscious about speaking. And we'll talk a little bit more about how do we address that. Finally, activities should be meaningful and involve real conversation. This means that students are not just completing a worksheet or writing some answers, but that whatever they are doing is for some sort of purpose that they can connect to the real world. So I'd like to talk a little bit about some myths. Myths which are not true statements that some people believe about communicative language teaching. Now, the first is what I mentioned before, that it only involves speaking and listening. However, communicative language teaching should also involve reading and writing as well, since it is a way of communicating with others. Another myth that is often thought of is that it ignores grammar completely. So some people think if you use CLT, this means you are not focusing on grammar, but that's not true. Grammar is a critical part of communicative competence. Grammar is still taught when using CLT. However, it is taught in context, meaning you teach the grammar when it is necessary, when it is important to learn. Another myth is that you can only use one method, one way for CLT. But CLT can be used with many different approaches and has many different methods. So as I mentioned before, a method is a specific formulaic way or strategy for teaching. For example, using games or having projects, but you can use many different kinds of methods with CLT. So, what do you think might be some additional benefits and challenges to using CLT? So I know that many people may say, this sounds really great, but this might be hard to implement in my class. So please share in the chat box, what do you think are some benefits and what might be some challenges? For example, one challenge that I think a lot of teachers in Japan may have is that the entrance exams often focus on grammar and vocabulary instead of communication. Because of this, it makes it hard for teachers to use CLT in classes. So what other benefits or challenges? Please share in the chat box. I'll just give everyone a minute to share your thoughts. For example, one benefit might be that it helps students feel interested in learning English. So we have some responses coming in. Okay, so it helps make sure that everyone gets a turn. Yeah, that's a great point. Another benefit is that it will motivate students. They like CLT better. Okay, so maybe the students will find the classes more interesting if they have a chance to communicate with one another. Yes, so it will help them focus on acquiring the 4 skills, and they can learn from their mistakes. Yes. Yes, I absolutely agree that that is very important when learning a foreign language. Yes, so students can definitely enjoy actually communicating with their classmates and express themselves. Yes, so it gives them a chance to share about their interests, what they believe in, how they feel about a topic. Yes. Yes, absolutely. A challenge is going to be how do we use CLT to still support learning for entrance exams, right? And adapting to entrance exams. Benefit is motivating students and helping them use English. Yes. So students can practice the language in a real life situation. Yes, so that's important, right? We learn a language not just for the sake of learning it, but because we want to use it in real life. Yeah. Students want to speak English, but there are different proficiency levels. Yes, that's an excellent point. So that's really challenging for teachers because they need to prepare some different materials to help every student. Yes. Some students can learn what kinds of ways of communicating they are good at. Yeah, absolutely. It's difficult to evaluate in written tests. Absolutely. So especially with speaking, that can be quite challenging, right? To how do you evaluate speaking? Yes, very good. And making a good criteria is really important and can be difficult. Yes. And it's also hard for special needs students. Absolutely. So that's important to consider as well as who are our students, and for our special needs students, how do we make sure that they are still learning using CLT, right? But it helps them interact with friends. Excellent. So really great points, everyone. Thank you so much for sharing. So I want to go ahead and share 3 CLT activities that can be adapted to different topics, levels, and ages. And these 3 activities are think, pair, share, jigsaw reading, and 20 questions. So there are, as I mentioned, many different methods, many different activities, but as long as it addresses the principles, it falls under the umbrella of communicative language teaching. Yes. So think, pair, share. This is a way of organizing discussions. You as a teacher will pose an open-ended question. This means that the question does not necessarily have a right or wrong answer. It's a question that gets students to think, and they have to explain their thinking. Students have 1 minute to think, and they will take a moment to write down their thoughts. They don't need to write in full sentences. Maybe they write some ideas, right? This part is really important because it allows students to consider, how am I going to say this in English? One of the challenges of learning a foreign language, and I notice this as I am learning Japanese, is that when I speak in Japanese and I hear a question, I listen to the question. I must translate that in my head to English. Okay, what is being asked? And then I think of my answer. And then I think, okay, how do I say it in Japanese with the correct vocabulary and grammar? Now that's a lot of steps, and that requires time. So this 1 minute to think and write is important for students. So after students have that 1 minute to think and write, and you can make it 2 minutes or 3 minutes, you then have students share in pairs. So in pairs, students are able to share their answers. I say 2 minutes so that one student can share for 1 minute, the other student can share for the second minute. Now, this is important because sometimes when you ask a question, first, it's really hard to think of the answer and you have to take some time. But second, your students are very shy and they get nervous. They don't want to raise their hand. They don't want to be wrong, right? So they are not going to answer. But if there's only just one person they're talking to, it's a lot easier to share your answer in English. So I would be very nervous to share my speak in Japanese, especially because I'm a beginner, in front of a whole crowd of people. It would be very, very hard for me. But if I'm just speaking to one person, it's a little bit easier. So every student gets a chance to practice. After that, you have the whole class come together and you might select a few students to share. Now, one thing that I like to do is I will ask the student to share not their answer, but their partner's answer. So that means they need to listen to their partner. So they're not just talking, and then when their partner talks, they're just thinking, I'm really hungry right now. They have to actually listen, right? So they listen to their partner, and then when they share, maybe I'll just choose 2 or 3 students from the whole class to share. What did their partner say? Now that because students have already shared, they're more likely to share in a whole class. Right? So this is Think, Pair, Share. You can use it with many different activities and topics. So let's go ahead and do it now. It's a little bit challenging because we are online and not in person, but we'll go ahead and try this out a little bit. So this is going to be more of like a think and then share without the pair, but imagine you were speaking to a partner. But the question I'd like for you to think about is imagine you walk into a class where a teacher is using communicative language teaching. You walk in. Okay, you're in the class. What do you see? What does it look like? And what does it sound like, right? So you walk in, I see this class. The teacher is using CLT. What do you see? What do you hear? Okay. And what you'll do is take 1 minute to think, and I'd like for you to type in the chat box your answer. Now, if we were all together, then I would have us in pairs and we will share. But since we are online, we'll just share in the chat box. But just take a moment to think and then type, what would a class with CLT look like? What do you see? What is the teacher doing? What are the students doing? Where are they sitting or standing? And what do you hear, right? So please take a moment to share in the chat box. And remember, if we were using this in a real classroom and we were together, you would be together in partners first and then as a whole class. Yeah, so I see some answers coming in. They would enjoy using English with their partners. Yes, so you would hear the student, "Da, da, 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 da." Yeah, there's some happy talking going on, right? And you see the students are talking to other people and each other. It's a lively atmosphere. Yes, so we're going to hear, it's going to be a little bit loud, right? Because there's going to be talking, maybe some laughing, some gestures and actions. It's going to look active. Okay, classmates are going to be laughing. Very good. Active students looking at their classmates, right? So they're not just looking forward, they're looking at their classmates, right? Yeah, excellent point. Yes, so they're feeling comfortable talking with their pairs. Yes, lots of smiles, hearing lively chats, loud in a good way. Yep, that's right. Yeah, they're actually using English. So as you listen, you're not hearing Japanese, you're hearing English, right? Yes. So they're speaking a lot with pairs and groups, using gestures, nonverbal strategies. Yes, really important. Yeah, they're talking about the topic and enjoying English and not hesitating to make mistakes. So maybe you hear some mistakes. That's okay, right? Yes, very nice. Really great, great answers, everyone. Students try to answer the question and listen carefully to the answers being shared. Yes, excellent points. So that strategy is think, pair, share. I hope that it's one that can be used in your classes. Now let's look at a second task. And this one is called the jigsaw task. Now, it's a little bit complicated looking, but once I explain it, I hope that it's clear. So you can have 4 different readings or tasks, or 3 or 6. It doesn't matter as much, just as long as you have different readings. So they're all different. They should all be about a similar topic. So for example, if you are learning about the environment and about ways to help the environment, maybe one reading is about recycling. The second reading is about reusing materials. The third reading is about saving plastic from the ocean. And the fourth reading is about good farming practices. Okay, so all different, but all about the same overall topic, the environment. So here I have this visual. The students get into groups. So let's say you have, I know your classes are much larger, but let's say you have 16 students. So 4 students will read the first reading about recycling. 4 students will read about reusing materials. 4 students will read about, I forget what my topic was it the ocean plastic? And 4 students will read about farming practices. So maybe you will give them 5 to 10 minutes to read or do some task. Now, this is where the jigsaw comes in. One person from each group will come together. So notice we have in this group, one person from each of the 4 readings. So one student who has read about recycling, one student reusing, one student ocean plastic, one student farming, right? And what do? They get into the new groups and they share what they have learned. Right? So for example, I'm going to say, Tomoko-san was reading about plastic. Tomoko-san will share what they learned in the group. I read about reusing materials. I will share with the group. Eri-san has read about ocean plastic and will share with the group. And then Yoko-san has read about farming and will share with the group. So now everyone has a chance to learn about all of the different topics. After that, you don't have to have this part, but you can. Students return to their original group and can share what they learned and answer any questions. Okay. So this is something that you can do with any reading from the textbook. You can break it up into different pieces. So every student doesn't have to read every part, right? Why? Because they're still going to learn by communicating with each other. They have to speak and they have to listen as well to share that information. So let's go ahead and I'm going to skip this next slide. And we're going to go into our third activity. Before I move on, any questions so far? All right. Well, in this third activity, this is called 20 questions. And there are many ways of doing this, but this is just one way. You can ask students to write a person, place, or thing on a slip of paper and collect them. So for example, perhaps you are learning about different countries, and so each student writes the different country name. You know, you write Japan, Vietnam, Australia, United States, and you will collect that paper. You will then mix it up and share the papers to different students. Then in small groups, I would say 4 students max, the groups must guess what that slip of paper says. So that student sees the paper, does not show to anyone else. They only have it for themselves. And the other students ask some yes/no questions. The student who is being asked cannot say what's on the paper, but can only answer yes or no. And the group must try to guess what it is using only 20 questions. So we will demonstrate this activity. Megan, who is from the US Embassy, will also be helping out with this activity. So I have a slip of paper where I have written, or I have been given the paper, and now Megan is going to guess and ask me questions. So Megan, go ahead.
Hello, everyone. Okay, let's see. Is this person male?
No.
Is this person famous?
Yes.
Is this person a politician?
No.
Is this person in action movies?
No.
Is this person an actress?
Yes.
Ooh, female actress. Okay. Is this person under 30 years old?
No.
Is this person married?
Yes.
Is this person's husband an actor?
No.
Is this person's husband famous?
Yes.
Ooh. Is this person American?
Yes.
Is this person's husband American?
No.
Ooh. Is this person married to a royal?
Yes.
Oh, is this person Meghan Markle?
Yes. This person is Meghan Markle.
Yay!
Yay! Nice work. So Megan was able to guess who the person was that I had within 20 questions. So that is how you would play this activity. And you can use it for different topics, right? You can have people, famous people, places, things. So there's lots of different topics, but it requires a lot of speaking, right? So Megan had to ask many questions in order to find out the answer. Even though I could only say yes or no, she was able to ask. And then when we switch, I would be asking a lot of questions. So my final question is, how might you use these activities in your own classes? So take a moment in the chat box to share. We went over 3 activities. First was think, pair, share. The second was jigsaw task. And the third was 20 questions. So would you be able to use any of these in your classes? If so, how would you use them? Please go ahead and share your answer in the chat box. We'll give a few moments for you to go ahead and share. So a reminder, we had think, pair, share, and I'll add this into the chat box so everyone can see. Think, pair, share, 20 questions, and jigsaw activity, jigsaw task. Oh, very nice. So you use jigsaw for reading. Awesome. That's great to hear that it's already being used. 20 questions for grammar learning. Great. Think, pair, share will reduce stress. Yeah, it's a great warm-up activity as well. So if you know the topic for the lesson, you can have students start to think about the topic and share what they already know. Yes. 20 questions. Yes, so different topics could be animals, and they can use different question types. That's an excellent point. So it doesn't just have to be yes, no, they can use a different type of question, like can you? Yes, so using jigsaw after a reading lesson. So different news articles in English to deepen their understanding of the topic. Great, great, glad to see that. All right, so today we focused on just introducing communicative language teaching. And it can be, it's focused mainly on communicative competence. And we looked at 3 activities: think, pair, share, jigsaw, and 20 questions. And I see in the comments, 3rd graders, it might be difficult to use these activities. That's a really great point. It might be a little bit difficult. So you can also change some of these activities a little bit in order to simplify it. So something like think, pair, share, you could ask a question and then they have to draw an answer, right? They can draw instead of write, and then they can show their drawing and share using simple English, right, with each other. Yes, so think, pair, share, they don't have acquired not as many words. 20 questions, yeah, might be good in Japanese for relationship building. Yes, absolutely. Yeah, might be challenging for very, very young learners who are just learning English. Yeah, great point. All right, so I wanted to share the references for today's session where the research came from. And I wanted to give us a little bit of time for questions, and just wanted to thank everyone for attending today. Apologies again for the mix up with the Zoom link. And finally, there is a poll and a feedback form that I would like for you to fill out. This is just an opportunity for us to receive feedback about these sessions so we can make them better in the future. there's a QR code on the screen, or I have shared the link in the chat box. This is an anonymous survey to understand more about what you've learned today and what other topics you would want covered. So one thing that I'm thinking now is that maybe focusing specifically on activities, communicative language teaching activities for younger learners and for beginning English students would be really important, right? Because some of these are more for middle and high school. So great point. Yeah. Any questions? Feel free to add them in the chat box or to unmute your mic and ask. Okay, great. So question, what is the topic for next week's session? So next week, we will be focusing on how do we adapt the textbook for more communicative language teaching approaches. So sometimes the textbook can not be as communicative. How do we actually still use the textbook and make some of the activities more communicative? If there are any other questions as well that come up after the session, you can always add them into the feedback form and I will make sure and address them in next week's session as well. All right. Well, thank you very much, everyone, for attending. I appreciate your time and all of your attendance. I know you're very busy, and so this is something that's very important to me, and I appreciate you coming and listening. All right. Thank you very much, everyone. I hope to see you next week.